Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to talk about Arbaal the Undefeated. You see, Arbaal is very likely the FLC legendary lord for Khorne in the upcoming DLC, of which we have no name yet. And in this video I want to talk about Arbaal mostly because, well, I'm very much curious on how he could actually play. You see, when it comes to Khorne, it's very simple. Go, kill stuff, do it again, right? It's not a very complex style of play. However, we already know that Skulltaker, who is the paid legendary lord, is going to have his own unique mechanics. And considering that the last legendary lord that we got for free, Epidemius, had his own unique mechanic, but it wasn't really too unique, it was just an extension of the current one, there's a few things that we could potentially talk about. So yeah, let's begin. First up, we got to talk about his stats and rules on the tabletop. I would actually ignore his stats flat out, mostly because, as you can see, they're extremely inflated. I've never seen a Khorne character with ballistic skill 8, by the way, and in most cases, the initiative value being 8 is extremely high. This is because this is from 5th edition, and 5th edition was highly inflated towards characters. In terms of the special rules, we've got the Mark of Chaos, which we already know is a Mark of Khorne. We're already pretty much used to that in the marking system for Total War. He's got Wrath of Khorne, which is very interesting here, because essentially what this is if he ever flees, he'll turn into a Chaos Spawn. Now, I don't think that that would actually be implemented in Total War, considering that, one, that would require a unique new model, which seems pointless for a negative, and secondly, you know, Khorne already has issues with fleeing. If you flee, you have issues with bloodletting and so on, and bloodletting is very much likely going to stay. It's a core mechanic for the Khorne race. I could see this translated into a way that could kind of benefit the Khorne faction though, where if units start fleeing around him, there's a chance of them turning into Chaos Spawn, with the Chaos Spawn themselves being fairly good. This is something that we've mostly seen with Morgor the Shadowgave, where with his damage and so on, he'll start spawning some spawns. I could see that happening. It could be interesting. It would be a very powerful bonus instead of being a negative here, but it's the idea of having some extra stuff to play around with. Now, challenges aren't in Total War Warhammer 3, but in challenge, it was basically, yeah, he'll do a challenge. If he wins, he can immediately challenge again, keeping to the theme of Khorne, constantly killing if you're able to. And with those stats, I mean, you were pretty much golden. So I could see his challenge being redone as an ability very similar to the Witch Hunter's Accusation ability, so you could end up debuffing characters that you're in contact with and basically becoming a character killer. While it's very likely that Skulltaker himself is going to be a character killer, it's just something that makes sense for a lot of Khorne characters. I mean, even Skarbrand does it very well too. And then lastly, we've got some magic items, the Hound of Khorne being his mount. So for those not aware, he doesn't ride on a Skull Crusher, he actually rides on a Flesh Hound of Khorne. This is a rather large one at that. The model is very old, by the way, again, 5th edition. If we do get Arbaal as a character, I'm imagining that they're going to update the visual look. There were rumors that we were potentially going to see Arbaal in Warhammer the Old World, but it's still very early, especially as right now they focused on like the Lieutenant or the Lieutenants. But naturally, having a Flesh Hound of Khorne as a mount also provides him with the Brass Collar, which means that he has an extremely high level of magic resistance. The last bit is the Destroyer of Khorne. So the Destroyer of Khorne is his axe. It's a hand weapon. It's been called a great axe before, but it's essentially just a one-hander. And what that did was allow him to have 2d6 attacks on the tabletop, which is a bit of a gamble. Obviously, you could end up with just 2 attacks, but you could end up with 12 and essentially just wipe out a character before he even has a chance to strike you, if you were going first, of course. So battle-wise, I could see him mounted from the very beginning, which would be kind of powerful, but we've had characters start off mounted before, mostly in the Bretonnia region, but it makes sense since the Flesh Hound was gifted to him around the Siege of Prague, or right before it. This character's been around for a long time, but we'll discuss it when we start going into the mechanic system. He'll be very good at challenges, he'll be very good at taking out characters one-to-one, and I'm imagining that he should be able to summon in some spawn. There's not much else that could be said there. He is a Khorne character, so it's essentially, well, you know, what Valkyr is doing, what Skarbrand's doing. Just very, very good at melee. In fact, in some parts of the lore, especially during the Siege of Prague, he is known to have slain 1,000 men. So when it comes to campaign mechanics, this is where things get a little bit tough. Mostly because, one, all the basics of Khorne are already there in the Mono-God faction, and 2, well, this character does appear a lot in the lore of Warhammer, in the end times, and a number of mentions in army books, but doesn't actually appear in army books, barring the 5th edition one, I believe. And yeah, it's mostly just, so he went there and killed this, and then he went there and killed that. During the end times, such as the more recent lore, we know that he basically spent his time in Ind and then was scooped up by the Dark Powers and taken to Middle-earth when, yeah, the plot was kind of dissolving onto itself because the Games Workshop writers were very overworked. And yeah, he just magically appeared. So when it comes to a start position, I've spoken this in the past, it's either going to be in Norsca, because he is a Norscan chieftain, by the way, and has been since before Sigmar was born, a few hundred years prior to that, if memory serves. Or he could be in the Kingdoms of Ind if CA have decided, let's open up that area a little bit so people have some more diverse start positions, which ultimately I would kind of prefer. I don't know if that's likely to happen. Now, that's not a Creative Assembly issue, that's more of a Games Workshop issue. Remember this whole IP thing? It's a back and forth situation, believe me. So I could see this character being very similar to Tamakon in a way, where he's going to focus more heavily on the mortal units. This makes sense because so far with Thrones of Decay we had that. We had Tamakon with mortals and then Epidemius as a kind of all-rounder. There is a fair amount of mortal units for Khorne. Like, he's got a pretty big roster to play around with, and the Slaughter Brutes coming in. We don't know just yet, but it might be the fact that we're going to get Wrathmongers and Skull Reapers also. So this character is definitely going to be incentivized to just have more and more armies of mortals. Marauders are very, very cheap, so you're going to be able to have armies up and running pretty fast. Let's be honest, like a lot of the other stuff for Khorne is quite expensive because it relies on you on winning battles, but early on you're not really getting a lot of battles as it stands. When it comes to the unique mechanic, I could see it in a very similar way to Epidemius. Now, I know some people might not be for this, but I think it makes a lot of sense, right? So you've got your basic bloodletting. This is something that you're going to be getting with all your Khorne factions. But what if there was a bar at the very top which just gave you more bonuses? But this would be affected by all your characters, so the more damage you're doing, the more you're filling out that bar and the more bloodletting you're getting. This would mean rather than the bloodletting being focused on an individual army, it's focused on a faction-wide aspect. The point of this is to keep you as aggressive as possible in a similar way to how Epidemius, you were incentivized to keep throwing out plagues, rather than focusing on super plagues. So yeah, early on you'd be having a lot of armies focusing around marauders, and more marauders. But let's be honest, with how the marauders play, you wouldn't be disincentivized to actually do this. It's not the most stylized of mechanics, but it does lend to a little bit more of a play style. Epidemius, for example, is a very fun character, so something in that regard, but also quite different because how you get those bonuses is a different thing, yeah, could work. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what Creative Assembly have planned all along, and it would be very similar when it comes to Tzeentch and then also Slaanesh, where Tzeentch would be focusing on how much Winds of Magic you can pick up and just store, and then Slaanesh, I don't know, a Horny Meter or something. So it's not an outright copy-paste, because at the end of the day, there is some differences, but it's inspired from the others, which for 3 characters, I guess kinda works. I think the main thing of discussion here is that not everyone has to have a massive, bombastic type of mechanic and so on, because if their lore doesn't have that type of information, it's better to work on something that works, change it around, and give it a different aspect. The bonus aspect of this too is, while they are very similar in terms of mechanic, because their races are so drastically different, Mono-God Nurgle and Mono-God Khorne, it's going to have a different feeling towards it. And we've seen mechanics sometimes reused, right? We've got the Books of Nagash now being used by Volkmar when originally it was just the Tomb Kings, and it works fairly well. Still not what I would have personally done for Volkmar, but it's still better than nothing. So yeah, that's how I see Arbaal being done. Now, I could be wrong, and some other people might have better theories, or maybe you guys do, but the idea here is keeping it lore-friendly to the character, where it's literally just a blender character and that's it, whilst extending the mechanic that's already available and focusing heavily on mortals. On the faction effects, I would love to see some reduction to Chaos Warriors of Khorne and so on, so again, you're more incentivized. I think that's a really big thing here. Tamokhan did it so well where you're incentivized to use mortals. Well, you can use a little bit of everything, but I think if you want to keep a lore aspect, that's what happens. And I want the same for Arbaal, if Arbaal ends up being the legendary lord. I mean, Creative Assembly could end up just throwing a fastball at us and just go, hey, it's Kabanda, you know? I don't know. I would not be against Kabanda, but it would be kind of out of place at the moment. Maybe when an End Times DLC happens. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I do apologize that I've been a bit MIA this week. I have been sorting out a bunch of things, which has been taking a lot of time away from me, but we do have some battle reports coming. We are going to celebrate October this month, don't you worry. And yeah, I'll see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.